Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I am so excited about today's episode and conversation and our incredible guest that we've got on the air today, because this is somebody who has brought his career of experience and skills into an amazing entrepreneurial journey that is making the world a better place. Not only in business terms, but you're going to see that this is someone who cares deeply about quality of life for everybody, and as a former developer, he has built something that helps us do exactly that. So let me introduce you to today's guest. His name is Russell Ball. Russell has spent the past 25 years in software development across healthcare and finance, with deep experience in data analytics and building scalable systems. A few years ago, he turned a passion project focused on healthy aging into a business, building tools that help people understand how their current and desired activity levels translate into long-term health and longevity outcomes, grounded in the latest science. He's been awarded multiple grants, recently completed a pilot with a hybrid physical therapy clinic, and is now onboarding his first gym while launching a direct-to-consumer version of the product. At the heart of his work is a simple question: how do we get people to think just as much about their health as they do about their finances when planning for retirement? It's a big mission, and this is somebody who builds very brilliant solutions. I'm excited about this one. Let's dive straight into my interview with Russell Ball. All right, Russell, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Heck yes. I'm so excited to talk about, I feel like you have wizard powers, because anyone who can actually create things, I'm so in awe of, especially in today's day and age. You can come up with solutions and launch it to the world and change lives. But Russell, before we jump straight into that stuff, you've got to take us beyond the bio. Who is Russell? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Well, you kind of gave a good intro. So I've been in software development for about 25 years. I would say kind of a fundamental part of that was about halfway through my career. I started working for a company called Strenis, and technically it wasn't a startup because it had been around for I think about 8 years at the time, but it had a startup feel because it was under 10 people and it was bootstrapped at the time. And that was a formative experience for me because it was the first time where I felt that I could really see that the work I was doing had a direct impact on the success of the company. And there was a lot of opportunity for me to use my creativity in developing a new product and kind of solve some interesting problems that had to be done very quickly and under budget. And so eventually we became the victim of our own success, and several years later, we grew to about 100 people and were acquired, and that turned into a company of several thousand people. And gradually, I kind of got away from what ended up being the sweet spot of my career, and fast forward to just a couple of years ago, and I had kind of taken that realization of where I really felt work was most meaningful for me, along with the passion project I had in longevity and things I've been learning about there, and kind of started flirting around with the entrepreneurial world, took a class, applied for non-dilutive grants, and eventually took a step about a year ago of kind of taking off the golden handcuffs and taking a risk and forming my own company and doing that full time. So that kind of brings me up to right now.
Yes, I love that overview. There's so many things that I want to dive into, Russell. But first things first, there's no better person to introduce MyHealthSentry to our worldwide listeners than you, because I love your two-pronged approach. I love the fact that you're going after these partnerships with gyms, with organizations that have people who they want to help further along in their health and fitness journeys and aging journeys. I love the fact that you think about aging in such a healthy way. And then obviously the direct-to-consumer front. So introduce listeners to your business, the solution that you've come up with, and really how you're bringing it to the market.
Yep. Well, my overall mission really is I want to get people to start thinking about, so the problem space is health span, and how do you get to the last 10 to 20 years of your life and still have a good quality of life, not be in pain, not be suffering from diseases that are ultimately mostly preventable. And so I want to get people to the point where they're thinking that the work they're putting into now, just like when we put money aside in our 401k, I want people to think of, well, I'm doing this workout or doing this healthy habit is the same as doing a 401 contribution. And so that's the overall general mission statement of it. I pivoted several times since I started trying to figure out what's the, where are the pain points that I can best solve. I think I started with just trying to give people insights that this healthy habit could lead to this X number of, extra years in your life or this much risk reduction. And that really, after trying some solutions out with people, I realized it wasn't just about knowledge, it was more about motivation. And I tried some stuff out with that. That's a very tricky problem to solve. And I ultimately came to the conclusion that part of motivation is really, social accountability and getting help, especially as you get over 40, like being able to build muscle without hurting yourself. And so that led me down the road of personal trainers and physical therapists, and how I can, and really led me to the introduction of some of the problems that they have. For example, that they only work with people a small percentage of time, and so they need the way to work with people more holistically, where they can see, for example, if they're not building muscle, it might not be because of what they're doing in the 1 hour session. It might be because they're not getting enough sleep or not getting enough protein or have some other lifestyle factors coming into play. So really how I can help them do that. And then ironically, how I can take AI, which seems very non-human, and how I can attack one of the number one motivation problems, which is really how do I build a relationship between the coach and the person, to really, which is going to motivate them and help them stick with it longer, and ultimately help solve the problem of the preventative health issues that I'm concerned with. So.
Russell, hearing the way even you answer that question is, when I talk to you about the solution that you've built, you jump straight to the mission. And as someone, I obviously know a lot of software developers, both in their current lives and in their past lives. Russell, not everyone goes straight to, here's my mission, here's my why, here's why this thing exists, ever before I've written a single line of code. Talk to us about that approach. It must have been somewhat of an anomaly in your software development career.
I'll be honest, probably my personality type lends itself towards cynicism, and a lot of software developers do. And I don't know how many times over my career I've rolled my eyes at mission statements and never really kind of saw it as a waste of time. But early on, as I was kind of churning, going through the learning cycles of being an entrepreneur, and pivoting as I should in place to place, I got the feeling I was thrashing from time to time. And my wife at some point, suggested you should really think of a mission statement in order to just kind of anchor you. It's good that you're pivoting and doing these things, but you feel like you've suddenly lost your anchor. And that was maybe 6 months ago. And I really sat back and thought, and that's really been surprisingly helpful. I kind of sheepishly think that just because of how I've always viewed mission statements, but it's really been super helpful for me to stay on track as I shift. So.
The other thing that I really hear in the way you're talking about this is how much you've also embraced the entrepreneurial journey as a whole, really on that macro level, is that you fully accept, and it sounds like you embrace the fact that you don't just get to be a software developer anymore. You don't just get to build an amazing product. You also are pushing this product into the world, which shipping, distribution, like these are the important things when it comes to building a business. What's that side of the coin looked like? Because it seems to me, listening to you and getting to talk to you today, that you've really embraced it.
Yeah, and that's also been a learning curve. I think I've for sure made mistakes of spending way too much time on the product because that's what I was comfortable with. And then, I've had a few mentors who, my first sale that I had, I was just having a beer and trying to get some advice from actually the company I mentioned, Strenis. He was the founder of one of the founders of that company. And so he's been helping me along my journey. And he kind of challenged me. He says, okay, stop, don't build another line of code. Just, I want you to go out and sell this first before you do anything else. And that was kind of formative. I think I've still made mistakes since then, but that always resonates with me whenever I feel like I've spent too many days in a row, fiddling with getting the feature just right, that tries to keep me balanced a little bit.
And Russell, you already called this out, but I want to explicitly go here in our conversation today that a lot of the mainstream narrative is trying to pit various industries and various careers against AI of, oh, software developers won't like AI. Sounds to me like you embrace it. Talk to us about how AI fits into all of this, both on the development side, but it also sounds like it factors into the product side for you as well.
Oh, it's really everything. And it's funny, when I started this 2 years ago, it had not really taken off yet. So it was really the passion project for me was how do I'd been promoted several times and kind of got to a managerial level, and I really wanted to get back to my development roots. And so the first like 3 or 4 months of this was all just hardcore doing what I used to do 20 years ago and relearning the coding part of it. But then agentic coding took off, and that's really made a difference in every aspect of it right now. And from month to month, that really accelerates it. And at first, I kind of embraced it. And now it's to the point where I almost have to let it wash over me, because my first instinct, whenever I'm working with somebody and they say, well, I really need something to do this. And my first instinct always is, how was it 5 years ago? 5 years ago, that would have been too big of a task. I'm going to have to push back on this. And now I kind of take a deep breath and say, oh, well, actually, that's probably possible now. And I think about it and do a prompt and then iterate on that. And suddenly a couple hours later, something I thought was going to take, weeks and only ended up taking a day or less. And so that's been transformative there. I would say in every aspect of the business, it's been transformative. Recently had a feature, obviously on the marketing, helping me with that aspect. It's been helping me with strategic thinking. I realized at one point in playing around with some numbers that I had AI help me do some projections with numbers, and I realized that my operational costs were going to be way higher than I thought, and it's going to make it very difficult. And so not only did it help me isolate that problem, but then it helped me brainstorm how to dramatically reduce the operational cost from not just from a technical perspective, but also just from a creative perspective. So it's been in that, like, it helped me on the legal front. I launched a feature that was kind of involved charities, which is a weird, straddles kind of a weird line with gambling, and has a lot of regulatory complexity to it. And so just being able to deep dive and understand that. And then obviously you don't want to rely on AI for true legal advice, but I was able to generate a list of questions that saved me thousands of dollars in legal costs, because I was able to come up with a list of 30 questions. This is what I thought the answer was. This is ranked by priority. The fact I think I have my business, and hand that to a person and have them say, is there anything that's wrong with this? Is there anything I'm not understanding right? So those are some recent examples of how it's been transformative. So.
Yeah, I love that. Russell, you brought up cynicism a little bit earlier in our conversation. I'm going to pick on that because I think you have a more relevant voice for a lot of listeners here than I do, because I'm always pointing at, and people are just like, well, yeah, you are the eternal optimist. You see the good sides of everything. But Russell, I do know full well, even as an eternal optimist, that when it comes to our entrepreneurial journeys, cynicism is natural. And probably cynicism is actually healthy to a degree as well. One of those ways that I think we're all cynical in our own entrepreneurial journeys is imposter syndrome or convincing ourselves, why am I going to launch a fitness app? There's so many others out there. I remember when I was writing my first book, why am I going to write a book about entrepreneurship? There's so many others out there. Same with the podcast. There's all these reasons why we why we shouldn't do something, but of course we have to overcome that in order to actually do something. Talk to us about that, because I'm sure you also hear it from others of, well, aren't there a bunch of other fitness apps? How do you internally navigate that? And then very curious about how do you publicly navigate that as well?
Interesting. So internally, I think that's really where the mission comes into play. Like, I know that if the mission I'm working on for myself is meaningful, and I know there's a lot of work left to be done on that, then even though there's a lot of it's a really noisy space, it's just the confidence that if I stick with it and keep navigating my way and talking to people and finding, I'll be able to find a niche where I'm able to help a group of people that have real pain points that are being ignored by other people. So it's really hard to know up front until you get in and get something out there and have people react to it like, man, maybe the no reaction is the reaction in and of itself. So really that's how I kind of navigate through that, is I believe that there's room in the mission, even though I'm not 100% sure that I've landed on the exact right market segment or the exact right pain points that are going to make me successful yet. And for navigating that for people, sometimes it's good. Sometimes if somebody comes back and is really cynical about it, then it helps me. It's just a time for me to reflect and saying, am I being really innovative enough in this space, or like and just constantly reevaluating that, because what's innovative enough now might not be so 4 weeks from now. And there's always, anytime you kind of make just a little bit of a pivot and improve things in a little bit more of a way, sometimes that can make all the difference. So that's how I navigate that.
I love how that fuels that innovation. And Russell, I feel like it also shows that you have an eternal evaluation engine, which I'm sure served you very well in your professional career. It's serving you incredibly well in your entrepreneurial journey as well. But I would imagine, especially in the world of software development, when you're launching products, that is challenged even more, because if you give 10 different people your product, I'm sure that you'll get 30 different pieces of advice about what it could do and what it should do. How do you filter through that stuff? I often come back to the Henry Ford quote where he once said, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. How do you make sense of all that feedback?
That is a great question. Since I started the passion project for myself to some extent and what I was interested in, sometimes I have to go back to kind of listen to that little voice. And I think I weigh it both ways, because I know that in any given situation, it might be a case where, I'm right or I'm the outlier. And so just kind of considering both ends of the coin helps me filter through that a little bit. And ultimately, I know that the more complex software is, ultimately the worse it is. So if you had 5 great solutions and you combine them all together, you're going to get a worse solution than any of them put together. Instead of like the best solution because you got all 5, you're going to come up with the worst solution because it's just too unwieldy, too much of a Frankenstein, and too hard to use. And so that always drives me too, is that every time I add something, is there something else I can simplify? Is there something, that I can do to still make this simple for people?
Ooh, I've never heard it phrased that way. Is I need to entertain both the fact that, hey, I'm right, but also, hey, I might be the outlier. That it takes me back to one of my favorite quotes, which I'm totally going to botch here in real time, is along the lines of the mark of a wise mind is its ability to hold 2 conflicting opinions at the same time and entertain them both. And I think that that's such a healthy mindset, not only in product development, but of course in our businesses and extrapolating further, even in our lives. And Russell, I would imagine, just doing the research on you ahead of our conversation today, that you also take inspiration from external sources and external factors. And I know that things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, those things play into not only the way that you approach software development, not only into the way you approach your life, but of course into the way that you approach entrepreneurship and building your business. How have those external influences shaped the way that you see the world and business?
I think, as you have to be kind of almost pathologically persistent to be an entrepreneur in some ways. And so I've had experiences both in martial arts, especially jiu-jitsu, and in extreme sports like marathon running, that are so physical and visceral that it's real easy when I get to a point, which is often in my entrepreneur journey, where I just get disappointed or tired or just doubting myself. Then I can kind of rely on these physical memories of, if it's just like I'm overwhelmed because there's too many things to do, then it just might be this memory of being in a marathon where I'm just like looking at the next goalpost and I'm like, I'm not going to do anything but that. And then you get to there and then you do the same thing and keep repeating. And I do that with Trello cards of just working through issues when that happens. When it happens where, like a pilot program will just go south and I'm thinking this is dead, I should give up, there's no way I should do this, then I can maybe draw on jiu-jitsu experiences where, when I first started that, you experience a lot of discomfort and you have to, and I did, personally, I didn't like discomfort. And so I would tap really quick. Somebody would get me in a position that was uncomfortable, like a chokehold or something like that. And I would just immediately tap. And then after doing it for a while, you realize that, okay, well, maybe it's not as bad as I think. You give it just a little bit longer. And then sometimes you realize, well, if I shift just a little way, then this will give me an out, or maybe you just wait long enough where the person gets tired and gives up. And then that's kind of like life just suddenly giving you an opportunity. And sometimes you just have to like take a deep breath and say, well, it's not as bad as I think. If I just shift a little bit and then look at the situation, maybe I'll figure a way out, or maybe life will just give me an opportunity if I just hold out a little bit longer. So those visceral experiences are really helpful for me, because I can just physically remember that experience and then say, okay, I can apply this mentally right now to my life.
Yeah, I love that. And Russell, having never been on a mat, I'm grateful for the way that you share that story, because instantly I see myself and I'm just like, yeah, 100%. I would tap out quickly. But then I also picture and I imagine that there are times in that mat where I love tennis, and I certainly experienced this on the tennis court, where you realize you can somewhat bend time. You can somewhat slow things down, breathe. You can start to make sense of the world, and you start to see it differently. You start to make decisions differently. And that's something that as entrepreneurs we're faced with every single day of our entrepreneurial journeys, tons of times all throughout the day. And that's where strategy comes into place. That's where reflection comes into place. And I want to switch gears a little bit and talk to you with that entrepreneurial hat on, because one of the things that I really admire about your business and your approach is that two-pronged approach of, hey, we're going to have partners, gyms, studios, trainers that are pushing this with their clients. I also want to have a direct-to-consumer app and channel. What does that look like? Because obviously that's a very intentional and strategic approach by you across those two fronts. Where did that come from? What's the thought process behind each? I'm so curious to hear more there.
Yes. So I have not, it's available direct consumer, but I have not put any money into advertising for direct consumer yet. So I think I started thinking, oh, this is going to be a direct consumer app. And then as I realized some of the difficulties and the cost of customer acquisition for that, I kind of shied away from that and thought, well, what's available on the B2B side? And then I really focused on that for a long time. And then after a while, really recently, when I came up with a new feature that was, kind of trying to motivate people through gamification of just, fitness competitions with each other, different creative, unique ways I could do that. And then I thought, well, what if I add a charity aspect to this, where people will, if they don't make their goals, then they donate to the charity of their choice, an optional amount. That was kind of what I alluded to for the legal part of it. That made me think, well, that gives me a route for direct consumer, because it's a little bit easier. It gives me a better messaging for that. And so it's still on the back burner, because I'm in the middle of onboarding stuff, and you just kind of have to prioritize, but that's kind of queued up next, to try to put some time and effort as soon as I have some breathing space into trying to really launch the direct consumer part. So it's kind of all about timing and finding out when I had an opening for what I thought would be successful for those avenues.
Yeah, and you bring up gamification, and I think that the fitness industry is the best one for us to remember this fact about all of our businesses that I'm about to say, which is, what's really important is that you're not just developing a good product, you are very intentionally designing a product that, one, people use consistently over time, and two, that actually delivers them the results. And it sounds very simplistic saying it, but of course the same is true for all of us in our businesses as well. Whether we have a product-based business, whether we have a service-based business, that's the whole point of business, is getting people to get results from that. I would argue that in the fitness realm, you give more intentional time and energy and thought into it, especially when you're developing a product such as what you've built. So, Russell, what do those internal conversations look and sound like? And I'm sure you also bounce some ideas off of AI as a thought partner along the way. When you think about getting people to consistently use the product, when you're thinking about how do I actually deliver results, and you're very fortunate because you use your own stuff. You are part of the user base that you're asking these questions of. What do those conversations look like, and what are the types of solutions that you come up with?
So this is one where I've iterated on a lot, by actually, my first thoughts on the thing is I would just start these little competitions. And that was kind of the iteration I had a while ago towards the beginning, and I would have them use it. And then it's just gauging reactions. And sometimes, like, especially the first groups of people I had were more people I knew. And so nobody's going to say anything negative to you. And so sometimes I was trying to read between the lines of, are they being, effusive about it, or are they, just kind of being nice about it? And then really what was especially helpful is, do they keep you just monitoring behind the scenes? Do they keep using it behind, are they, after they do the competition I asked them to do, are they using it, inviting somebody else to do it, or are they just done because they're so that was a lot of learning of not only what worked and didn't work, but sometimes things work, but they only work for a little while, and then people get bored of them, and then they stop. And then that was kind of where the motivation problem was very difficult, and that's really what transitioned me into realizing that through things like social accountability, or there's a real big social aspect to motivation, and that's part of the games I had originally, but also. Like me being part of jiu-jitsu, part of the reason that I go to jiu-jitsu is not just because I want to learn, because that kind of wears off after a while, but because I form relationships after time. And I kind of want to go there to class so I can see people before and afterwards. And that's a big part of the enjoyment. And with the fitness studios I'm working with now, a big buzzword is them trying to create a social community, not because they have classes, and they want to form relationships not just between the trainer and the people, but between the people in the classes, just like in my jiu-jitsu class. And so that's the part of motivation I'm really thinking about now, is how can I facilitate that? What are the different ways I can do that? So I'll pause here just in case I want a field of what you were asking.
Yeah, no, for sure. You absolutely did. It's very clear to me. Motivation is not something you shy away from. That is something that you say, I can't ultimately control my users' motivation, but I can set them up for success in as many ways as possible. And it actually leads me to, I love asking software engineers and developers this question, Russell, because to us on the outside, this is part of the wizardry magic that you have in your skill set, is feature roadmaps. That is something that is so alien to those of us who've not been in that sphere. Is you have the capabilities with your talents and your skill set. You could build a bunch of different features, but somewhere along the way, coming back to that filtering mechanism, you very intentionally plot out, I'm sure from a tech perspective as well as from a UI UX perspective, no, here's what makes sense. What does that feature roadmap look like? Is it true that you just have this long list that you say, hey, we could do all of these things, but how do you ultimately decide when to pull the trigger on a feature or not?
It's a good analogy for it is like, I think they call it grooming in software development, where it's kind of like weeding a garden, where it's not like, it really needs to be a multiple times a day type of, effort, where you have, I have kind of multiple lists, but sometimes the lists kind of move around, and I try to just evaluate everything based on any new information I have. So if I've just talked to somebody and there's a new prospective client that's I think I can sell on, or I'm going to demo to, or something else, that might bump up the priority of something. Or if I get particularly good feedback from something, that may bump up the priority or lower the priority. Or so it's really just having the discipline to continually keep it up to date, groom it, and just say, otherwise, if you just keep throwing a bunch of issues in a single list, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and lost. I mean, I probably have hundreds of issues in my issue tracker right now, and I routinely will go and just delete them, because the ones I thought were a good idea, that there's just, you got to be ruthless about saying, well, it probably is a good idea, but it's not a high priority for me right now. I'm just going to forget about it, and then if it's important, then it'll come back later.
Yeah, Russell, I've got to call this out, because getting the chance to interact with you here today and have this conversation with you, what's very clear to me is how intentional of a thinker that you are. And it makes me really curious about what that executive time looks like. Is it something that you intentionally carve out special executive time with yourself every single week where you ask these big strategic questions? Or is it something that you do while you're driving, while you're in the shower, while you're eating?
Yeah. I think, most of my time is really, unfortunately for my wife and people I'm around sometimes, is really, times when I'm just out walking or driving or taking the shower. I do have, one thing I like to do is I have whiteboards in my room, and I keep that for strategic thinking and prioritization. So I can, I'm every time I look up from the work I'm on, I look at that, and that's my big picture thinking board. And I often will erase and retry and rethink. And so it's nice to just have something external that's always visible to me, that's devoted to really more high level strategic thinking.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Russell, along those lines, I've got to put you on the spot one final time because I knew time would fly by with you today. But this is the question that I ask at the end of every single episode. It's super broad. You can take it in any direction you want. And that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and knowing that you are one of us, you're a fellow entrepreneur. What's that one thing you want to leave them with today?
I would say prioritize meaningful work in your life. And I think this applies to both groups because as a entrepreneur, before I finally made the leap, I was really reluctant to do it because I had a very well-paying job, and I felt really guilty of leaving that behind for my family. And one thing that was kind of another formative event that happened is I was just talking to my 17-year-old daughter, and she tosses out, as many teenagers do, kind of a criticism about, I don't want to grow up and just just have a job I hate for the rest of my life. And I really realized that she was talking about me at the time. And it was helpful for me because it helped me realize that, hey, I know that I'm providing for my family in a good way, but there are other very valuable lessons that I should be teaching and giving my daughter by example. And one is like pursuing meaningful work. And so that really was one of the things that helped me make the leap. And then, I think for people who are already entrepreneurs that, it's really easy to, if you don't have a central mission, it's really easy to chase the money and, in the same way. And you start to your work becomes a little bit less meaningful because it strays from what you originally intended it to do. And so I think that's just a general lesson that you can kind of apply at all stages when you're just starting and as you're going. So.
Yes, I love that. So well said. And Russell, I can very confidently say that you've not only been an example for your daughter in this case, but our worldwide audience of wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, because all of your answers come back to, I lost track of how many times it comes back to the mission, is that your mission literally is where you seek for those answers. And so you don't build features for feature's sake. You come back to the mission of, is this actually going to help people? And I think that that's such a powerful reminder in all of our businesses. I'm also very excited for listeners to see how that is literally shaping your product and your business. So for listeners who want to find your business online, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
You can go to MyHealthSentry.com. Sentry as in like a guard, SENTRY.
Yes, and listeners, you already know we're dropping that link down below in the show notes. No matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode, you can go straight to MyHealthSentry.com. You can click right on through. We're also linking to Russell's personal LinkedIn. So if you want to reach out to him, if you want to introduce him to a gym or a trainer or a coach, or you want to say, hey, Russell, we're waiting for that direct-to-consumer app, don't be shy about having an amazing fellow entrepreneur in your network. So you can find those links down below. Otherwise, Russell, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Brian.